For a title to become an important part of one wrestling company's history is one thing, but for it to be an important part of two is almost unheard of. And for it to be a part of not just three, but four, well, that might only apply to one piece of gold out there, the gold we're going to be looking at today. So join us as we take a deep dive into the entire history of the United States title right now. The story begins on January 1st of 1975. That was the day a new belt was introduced to Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, the company which would later be renamed Jim Crockett Promotions. Why was a new belt being introduced here? Well, it was felt at the time that Mid-Atlantic needed something new which would boost fan interest, something which could be defended exclusively on their shows, but which retained the National Wrestling Alliance brand as a top-level prize. You see, back then there was only one sanctioned world champion in North America amongst territories which were part of the NWA, and this meant that for the vast majority of the time, each company had to deal with the fact that this world champion was not going to be a part of their show. No, unless the champ at any given time was a mainstay of your promotion, you could usually only count on them making it to your TV for a couple of weeks out of the year, with the rest of their time being spent traveling around the remainder of the country and defending against other performers in other states. So as a way to alleviate this, regional top titles were often used, with this being what gave us things like the NWA Tri-State North American Championship in Mid-South Wrestling and the NWA Pacific Northwest Heavyweight Championship in Portland. As for Mid-Atlantic, well, while originally the NWA Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight Championship had filled this role, come the mid-70s, it would quickly find its place being usurped by the NWA Mid-Atlantic United States Heavyweight title, the aforementioned new belt which was introduced here. Why was that? Well, part of the reason was because the standard of the early champs who had possession of this piece of gold were so high. Hell, that was evident with the very first man to call it his own, Harley Race, as by then, he was already a multiple-time NWA World's Champion. Yes, right away, it was made clear to fans that this was not going to be any old mid-card prize. Rather, it was going to be the top one contended for in Mid-Atlantic when the NWA World's Champion wasn't there, even a level above the Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight title. And as further proof of this, the rule was made early on that whoever held their US Heavyweight title whenever the top champ came into town would be considered the number one contender to that belt. Obviously then, this was good news for Race, and it awarded him an opportunity or two to win the gold throughout the first half of 1975, right up until the point that he dropped it to Johnny Valentine on July 3rd of that year. How would Valentine's run on top fare in comparison to his precursor? Well, not quite as well, because while he would have a strong reign himself, Johnny would be forced to vacate the gold on October 4th, 1975, when a plane crash he was involved in left him so badly injured he'd have no choice but to retire from in-ring competition for good. Needless to say then, this was sad news for everyone who knew Johnny Valentine. But things had to carry on regardless, and so a tournament was held soon after this to crown a new champion, a tournament which was ultimately won by Terry Funk. Yes, the Funkster was now the champ. And over the course of what remained of 1975 and into 1976, he would be one of three people to hold the gold overall, as Blackjack Mulligan and Paul Jones would also get runs. That's right, while back at this point it wasn't uncommon for world champions to hold onto their belts for years at a time, when it came to top regional prizes, they changed hands a lot more frequently, with this continuing to be the case as 1977 and 1978 happened, and Ric Flair, Ricky Steamboat, Mr. Wrestling, and Bobo Brazil all got shots with the Mid-Atlantic US Heavyweight title. Of course, in Bobo's case, this win was particularly important though, as he became the first black man to hold the belt. That said, his run as Mid-Atlantic US champ would only last for 21 days before the gold ended up in the hands of Ric Flair once more. And the Nature Boy would still be in possession of it by the summer of 1979, at which point he was forced to vacate after winning the NWA World Tag Team titles and being deemed unable to carry out the duties of defending both prizes simultaneously. Who would be the next person to hold the gold following him then? Well, after defeating Ricky Steamboat in the finals of a tournament on September 1st, 1979, Jimmy Snuka would be crowned the new champion, and he'd go on to hold it for the next 232 days, all before it once again made its way into the hands of Slick Rick. That said, it wasn't like Rick would be the champ when the belt became undisputed. No, the man who had it then would be Roddy Piper, as not long after he bested Flair on January 27, 1981, the Mid-Atlantic version of the NWA United States Heavyweight title would become the only version of the NWA United States Heavyweight title, when NWA San Francisco, the last remaining territory to recognize such a prize, closed their doors for good. Yes, from this point onwards, there was only one US champion out there, and for the next 193 days, that champion would be Hot Rod. but even his reign would have to come to an end eventually, with this happening on August 8th of 1981 when, at a live event in Greensboro, North Carolina, Wahoo McDaniel got the better of the kayfabe Scotsman. So it was then that around this point, what many consider to be the start of the golden age for the United States title began, as between then and the spring of 1985, the belt would be passed around between McDaniel, Piper, Ricky Steamboat, Greg Valentine, Sergeant Slaughter, and Dick Slater. Needless to say then, the US strap really felt like a top prize here, one which was worthy of being put in the same echelon as the NWA World's title at points. Basically, it was on the level of what the World Heavyweight Championship is at in WWE today when compared to the WWE title, or where the television title was in ECW during Rob Van Dam's legendary reign in the late 90s. But even this wouldn't be the apex of the prize. No, its apex arguably came in November of 1985, as that was when, after Tully Blanchard had won it 8 months prior, he'd put it up for grabs during a now iconic I Quit Steel Cage match against Magnum TA at the 3rd annual Starrcade show. What made this moment so special? Well, to this day, it's the match which many consider to be the greatest cage bout of all time. And like any good blow-off to a feud, it all ended with the babyface winning. As from there, Magnum TA would spend the next 153 days as champion. Really, this was supposed to be the moment that Magnum fully arrived as the heir apparent to what had by now long since transformed from Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling into Jim Crockett Promotions. And had the Chesapeake native not gotten badly injured during a car crash a mere 1 year later, forcing him into early retirement, he likely would have taken up this role. Yes, it's one of the greatest what-ifs in wrestling history, as there's a parallel timeline where, after first establishing himself with the United States heavyweight title, Magnum TA goes on to become the new face of the National Wrestling Alliance and the grittier, more adult-friendly alternative to what Hulk Hogan was doing over in the WWF. But that's not what happened. No, instead, the era of the man who would be king would be over, and it wouldn't be until decades later that an eerily similar rise played out with another cowboy Virginian who was very popular with the ladies and who served as the main character babyface of WWE's top competitor. But for as much as it might have been for Magnum to see history repeat itself under better terms, it must still hurt to know that he never got to reach such heights himself. No, he'd be out from here on in, and in his place, the mantle of US heavyweight champion over the next couple of years would instead pass on to the likes of Nikita Koloff, Lex Luger, Dusty Rhodes, and Barry Windham. In fact, it would be Barry Windham who'd be the man holding the title when, in early 1989, Jim Crockett Promotions was bought out by billionaire media mogul Ted Turner and was from there reborn as World Championship Wrestling. Sure, the title would still hold the NWA branding for the time being, but it was clear that it was now entering a whole new era of existence as a transitional period began. A period which saw it spend both 1989 and 1990 being bounced around between Lex Luger, Michael Hayes, and Stan Hansen, with the total package at one point holding it for a record 523 days. How would this transitional era end? Well, in early 1991, after WCW formally seceded from the National Wrestling Alliance, the United States heavyweight title would drop any reference to being sanctioned by the NWA and would instead become known as the WCW United States Heavyweight Championship. Who were some of the first holders of this version of the belt? Well, after Lex Luger had to vacate it after he won the WCW World Heavyweight title, a then still young up-and-comer named Sting would reign victorious during a tournament to crown a new champ on August 25th of that year. And so, like that, the 90s would get off to a strong start in terms of the prize which had first been held by Harley Race all those years earlier. And things would only get better as the decade progressed because by the time 1994 was over, present and future legends like Rick Rude, Jim Duggan, Vader, Dustin Rhodes, and Steve Austin would also have added their names to the ranks of those who had held the title in their hands and called it their own. Hell, it was his run as United States champion which really first put the future Stone Cold on the map back then, when he was still a relative rookie in 1993. So while it was no longer a belt being positioned on the same level as the world title, it was still serving an important role in elevating that next generation of stars further up the card, just as the Intercontinental title was doing over in WWF. Why had it become a mid-card belt here rather than the top prize for a territory as it had been before? Well, once WCW left the NWA, there was no more NWA World's title being defended on their shows. No, now they had their own world title, one which was exclusive to them and which wouldn't spend the majority of any given year traveling around the country being defended at other states. Of course, while this might have been sad for some to see, it was an inevitable shift which simply couldn't be avoided after a while, and it opened the door to a whole new tier of performers having a real chance at winning the prize. So it was then that over the next couple of years, Kensuke Sasaki, One Man Gang, and Conan would all get their own runs with it. But once Conan lost the gold, everything changed, as this was the point the New World Order took over WCW, and in the process of doing so, rocketed the company to previously unseen heights. That's right, in the summer of 1996 and throughout 1997, World Championship Wrestling was the undisputed #1 wrestling promotion on the planet. So because of this, the United States title suddenly got exposed to a whole new audience who hadn't grown up watching Jim Crockett Promotions. And that worked out great for new first-time champions who would hold it here. We're talking about people like Eddie Guerrero, Dean Malenko, Jeff Jarrett, Kurt Hennig, Diamond Dallas Page, and Raven. Sure, Steve McMichael wouldn't exactly be the most beloved champ ever, but even he was a former member of the Four Horsemen, so the prestige of the gold remained regardless. And that prestige would be even more evident during another run which served as a contender for the highest watermark the US title ever reached, the reign of Bill Goldberg. You see, back in 1998, Bill Goldberg was absolutely a phenomenon, approaching the level of what Stone Cold Steve Austin was doing over on the other channel. And the way he'd been able to get to this point was by spending his first year and a half in WCW mowing through absolutely everyone who was put up against him in short order. So when he finally got a shot at the secondary prize on April 20th, 1998 then, it felt like a given he'd be taking it home once the evening was over. And take it home he would, with this meaning that when he beat Hollywood Hogan for the WCW World Heavyweight title a couple of months later in front of 41,000 rabid fans at the Georgia Dome, he'd still be in possession of it and would be an official double champion. Sadly though, this night would also mark the end of Goldberg's run as US champion because, as per the rules of World Championship Wrestling at the time, two singles belts could not be defended simultaneously. So as a result of this, the Tulsa native would be forced to vacate the mid-card prize with immediate effect. What happened to it after that? Well, over the remainder of 1998 and into 1999, things would get pretty erratic as the US title went from Bret Hart to Lex Luger to Diamond Dallas Page to Rowdy Roddy Piper to Scott Hall to Scott Steiner to David Flair to Chris Benoit to Sid Vicious, and then all the way back to Bill Goldberg again. Needless to say then, its value was dropping fast here, and that value would only lessen as the infamous WCW 2000 came around, and it was won by Hugh Morris, Shane Douglas, Rick Steiner, and Lance Storm. Sure, Lance did try to do something interesting with it when he renamed it the Canadian Heavyweight Championship on account of him being from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, but that was only a short-lived run, and for as fun as it wasn't able to overcome the disaster that was World Championship Wrestling during its last full year in business. No, by this point, the die had been cast on WCW, and that would all lead to March of 2001, the point the once mighty promotion finally went out of business. Who would be the champ during that last episode of Nitro? Well, it would be Booker T, someone who, as a result of him beating Scott Steiner the same evening, would also close the doors on the company as its final world champion too. Did that mean the United States title, the title once so proudly worn by legends like Ric Flair, Sting, Dusty Rhodes, and Magnum TA, would never be seen again after this? Well, not quite, and the reason for that is because once WCW went out of business, Vince McMahon would buy them up for pennies on the dollar, meaning he now owned his competition and all of their intellectual property. So as you would expect, with the invasion angle taking hold in the summer of 2001, not only the United States title, but all other noteworthy World Championship Wrestling titles would make their way over to WWF TV. Not that Booker T, the final champ, would be the man carrying the US strap into this new battle for his company. No, as he was also the world champion and felt that defending this was responsibility enough, on the July 24th episode of SmackDown that year, he'd gift the secondary prize to Chris Kanyon. What happened from there? Well, from there, the next couple of months would see the belt jump around between WWF guys and Alliance guys, with it at various points coming into the possession of Tajiri, Rhino, Kurt Angle, and Edge. And that would lead us into Survivor Series in November of 2001. The night that the invasion angle came to an end when all the mid-card belts were unified and one promotion was put under once and for all. As to who the last US champion was at that show, well, this would be Edge, someone who'd beaten then Intercontinental Champion Test that night in Greensboro to unify both belts and formally retire one of the National Wrestling Alliance's most prized pieces of hardware. That said, even this wouldn't be the end of the United States title forever. No, in July of 2003, it would make a surprise reappearance. And the reason this happened was because, with the brand split having now been instituted and both Raw and SmackDown having been divided into two separate rosters, it was felt that a strong mid-card title was going to be needed for each show. So with Monday nights having the Intercontinental title then, it would be announced that the US strap would be getting reactivated and would be exclusive to the Blue brand going forward, with it now officially going by the name of the WWE United States Championship. Yes, for the third time in its history, the US title would be transferred over to an all-new company, just as it had done years prior when Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling became Jim Crockett Promotions, and again when JCP morphed into WCW. The only difference this time was that, for as big as World Championship Wrestling had been in the mid-90s, being a part of the WWE machine going forward marked probably its highest watermark in terms of worldwide visibility. Who would be the first person to hold it during this incarnation? Well, that would be someone who'd actually already held it back in WCW, Eddie Guerrero. Obviously then, the logic here was to try and make that transfer in lineage as smooth as possible, all while continuing the tradition of having the US strap be held by performers who could easily be in the main event of a show. And that would continue with the next couple of champs too, as they would be The Big Show and a then young up-and-coming rookie by the name of John Cena. That's right, before he was Mr. Hustle, Loyalty, and Respect, Big Match John was rising up the card in his Doctor of Thugonomics guise. And it was in this guise that he held the United States title 3 times between March of 2004 and March of 2005. Hell, he probably would have held it even more times here had he not ascended to the level of World Champion in 05. Again, keeping up a prior tradition of the US belt elevating younger talent. Who would pick up the mantle of this prize once Cena left it behind? Well, that would be names like Carlito, Orlando Jordan, Chris Benoit, and Booker T. And the feud the latter two men had over the gold was particularly interesting, as it saw them redo their classic Best of 7 series from WCW, the one in which they had originally fought over the very same piece of hardware. That said, for as good as things were going, there was a downturn waiting just around the corner. After all, given that the Intercontinental title was starting to lose some of its prestige over on Raw as the 2000s reached their midpoint, the same fate would inevitably befall the US title too. Yes, there were some less successful runs as the second half of the decade got going, runs from performers such as Fit Finlay and Mr. Kennedy. But then to be fair, there would also be pretty good ones from up-and-comers like Bobby Lashley and MVP, as well as solid reigns from more established acts like JBL and Matt Hardy. In fact, the Matt Hardy MVP feud over the belt is another one which remains fondly remembered to this day. Unfortunately though, it would also mark the point that the US strap stopped being SmackDown exclusive. Why was that? Well, because while Hardy was in possession of it in 2008, he'd be drafted over to the WWE CW brand, with this making the belt exclusive to the C Show for a brief period. Sure, that would change once Shelton Benjamin won it a few weeks later and took it back home to the Blue brand, but even this wouldn't be permanent, as after the Standard of Excellence dropped it to his future Hurt Syndicate stablemate MVP, and MVP was drafted over to Raw in 2009, the United States title would become a red brand-only piece of gold. How would the belt do over on Raw? Well, in truth, this was where it really started to lose its prestige, as while there were some very talented performers who held it during the early years of the 2010s, the booking often left a lot to be desired, as the once mighty prize never felt more like a nothing prop for the mid-card. Hell, even runs from people like Daniel Bryan, Kofi Kingston, Dolph Ziggler, and Sheamus couldn't help to turn its fortunes around here. And as for The Miz and R-Truth, well, they had even less success in doing so. That said, there would be one bright spot here, as it would be in May of 2010 that Bret Hart got another token run with it when he tapped Mike Mizanin out on an episode of Raw. Still though, while this was nice in the moment, in the long run all it did was further help to devalue the belt, as if a retired wrestler who wasn't even cleared to perform could win it, then how important could it be? And that downward trajectory would only continue as the 2010s got into full swing, and with the brand extension now over, the title was defended on both shows, in the process being passed around by lower card acts such as Zack Ryder, Jack Swagger, Santino Marella, and Kalisto. Sure, there would be an occasional bright spark to be found, like when Cesaro, Rusev, or Dean Ambrose held the gold, but overall it was clear the once mighty prize's best days were behind it. That was until they weren't, because against all odds, in 2015 the US strap would get a complete revival when John Cena won it at WrestleMania 31. Yes, this was the period where Big Match John went on his now legendary US title weekly open challenge run, something which, for the first time in WWE, raised the status of the mid-card gold to something approaching the level of a world title. Hell, at SummerSlam that same year, it would be in the main event, as John Cena defended it against then WWE champion Seth Rollins in a winner-takes-all match, a match which was ultimately won by the Architect. Where would it go now that Rollins had it? Well, from here it would bounce back to Cena for a while, all before moving on to other big names like Alberto Del Rio, Roman Reigns, Chris Jericho, and Kevin Owens. That's right, probably the best storyline WWE had during 2016 and 2017. The bromance between Y2J and KO ultimately centered around them doing battle over the United States title at WrestleMania 33. And once that feud was over, the secondary prize would continue its second wind, as with the brand extension now a thing once more, it would spend some time over on SmackDown again, there being held by the likes of AJ Styles and Randy Orton. Sadly though, some of the other champions here would be performers such as Baron Corbin, Bobby Roode, and Jinder Mahal, with this meaning that, yes, despite getting that boost in the immediate wake of John Cena's Open Challenge run, the US belt was now beginning to fall in prominence again. And that would only be more apparent as the 2010s came to an end, because while Jeff Hardy, Shinsuke Nakamura, Rey Mysterio, Samoa Joe, Ricochet, and Andrade were all great champions on paper, with each being an excellent wrestler in their own right, their booking while in the possession of the gold left a lot to be desired and made it next to impossible to get invested in any storylines they were involved in. Would this continue to be the case as the 2020s got going? Yeah, unfortunately. As here, while the world was going into lockdown, new first-time champs like Apollo Crews, Matt Riddle, Finn Balor, and Damian Priest wouldn't even be able to get out of the starting blocks. But things would finally start to turn around again in mid-2022, as that was when, with Vince McMahon being ousted from his own company for the first time amidst a sea of scandal and lawsuits, Triple H would take over the book and would immediately begin the process of trying to repair the prestige of the mid-card straps. Sure, you could argue the US title didn't fare as well as the Intercontinental title did here because, while Gunther's 666-day run with the latter belt saw it be completely reborn again, the former WCW prize would only partially be revived. Yes, it did get more focus placed upon it under the game, and would be treated like a serious thing to go after again to some degree, but champs like Austin Theory just never got over enough to justify being in possession of it, and first-time holders like Logan Paul weren't exactly in the spirit of early winners like Harley Race and Terry Funk. That said, even if there were some stumbles, overall the United States title has fared a lot better under Triple H than it did under Vince McMahon. And this has continued to be the case during the last year or two, as it was in 2024 that LA Knight, one of WWE's biggest cult sensations in recent times, got his own go-around with the mid-card gold, and he wouldn't be the only performer looking to break out to that next level who'd hold it around this point either. No, Solo Sikoa and Jacob Fatu would also do the same. And of course, when they didn't have the belt around their waists, the tradition of already top-level acts winning it would be kept up by Sami Zayn during his reign between August and October of 2025. And with him now dropping it to Ilya Dragunov as of the October 17th episode of SmackDown, it looks like he's done his job in getting another young star over. Where will the belt go from here now that the Mad Russian has it around his waist? We guess we'll just have to wait and see. But one thing is for sure, after a few bumpy years there, it looked like the United States title has once again settled into a groove which will see it retain a level of importance within the WWE for the foreseeable future. Yes, all the United States belt needs to do going forward is keep doing what it's always done when it's been at its best, and that's both help elevate younger talent, all while giving more established main eventers a prize they can fight over when they're not chasing the world title. After all, nothing will make a strap feel more important than having top guys want to have it in their possession, and hungry young up-and-comers want it even more.